What if I told you that there are real vampire plants living right now? Plants that suck the lifeblood out of others, spread viruses like zombies, and even steal DNA from their victims. And by the end of this video, maybe you'll know which one could wipe out an entire sunflower field and which one might be a little smarter than we think. Which is a little bit creepy, but hey, you know, it's October and Halloween is here. So, I thought I should maybe do an episode on some Halloween-themed plants in our lives, other than pumpkins, because there are so many others to pick from. I could have talked about a flower that looks like a bat, or maybe even a shape-shifting plant, right? Zombies are kind of out because I just talked about the resurrection plant and zombie forests. That's, yes, a real thing, and also a depressing topic for another day. So Venus flytrap feels a little too obvious. Werewolves? There is a plant that does something different on the full moon. I like that they make just little sugary nectar droplets so that it shines in the moonlight for a moth pollinator, which is a little more like Halloween candy than werewolves. So, yeah. Oh, by the way, when I looked up hairiest plant thinking I'd get something good and werewolfy, I got a plant called Hairy Balls Milkweed. Yeah. Not the direction I'm going, Google, so maybe let's not require age verification just to see this channel or this episode. But vampires, yeah, okay, speaking of smutty little creatures, I can work with that, right? These blood-sucking creatures, lusty little parasites that take their nutrients from us instead of, I don't know, work at a blood bank or date an insomniac phlebotomist, whatever. And off topic, I found that you can buy pork blood online. What? Anyway, never mind. There, yes, are plants that drain the life force from other plants, parasitic plants. And one of the most famous of parasitic plants is mistletoe. But yeah, okay, we're gonna ruin that plant for Christmas lovers in a future episode. So, for now, let's look at some other parasitic plants, but to group them first, so there are actually two main groups, hemiparasites and holoparasites. And within hemiparasites, so they only take part of their resources from other plants. Some of these could survive on their own, they just prefer a victim. Facultative hemiparasites. And others, well, you know, they require a victim, just not for everything. And these are called obligate hemiparasites. And then, of course, there are the holoparasites, true vampires of the plant world. And they almost never are able to photosynthesize, or at least it's very hard for them to, just a very minimal thing. And that leads to some creepy, weird, translucent, ghost-like things like the ghost pipe, Indian pipe, Monotropa uniflora. And yes, parasitic plants do have something like vampire fangs. As they latch on or wrap around another plant, they glue themselves on, often with pectin. Yes, pectin, you know, the same stuff that you put in jams and jellies. It's plant vampire saliva. Anyway, they then start sinking their fangs in, called hystoria, and they suck out water and nutrients, some taking from the phloem and others from the xylem. And these plants also have other traits that make them perfect analogies for so many creatures of Halloween. For example, as those hystoria sink in, some species send their RNA into the host plant, essentially hiding their foreign nature. It's kind of like when a mosquito numbs the wound as it drinks your blood. And the RNA and DNA of the host plant are passed into the parasite, even getting co-opted to perform functions as if they were doing it before. So, yeah, okay, these parasitic plants are Frankenstein monsters. Got it. And once they have attached themselves, they can manipulate the host plant, slowly killing it, of course, or maybe just forcing it into a half-alive zombie state. All right, we've got zombies now, too, in the mix. For example, one of the best-known parasitic plant pests, Dodder, yes, Dodder, spelled like doddering old fool, not like Dodder draining our savings accounts for college, just draining a plant. And Dodder makes the host behave differently by altering its gene expression and its defenses. For example, Australian Dodder was found to send signals between host plants to warn against hungry insects or salt stress. And this even happened across plant species, just whatever they latched onto and they could pass the message to. And okay, I mean, maybe only because a dead plant is a useless plant, but it's sort of helpful, right? I mean, kind of like not paying rent, but telling you when someone's breaking into the house. I don't know, but you know what? Don't get too happy there, because along the way, these creepy little body snatchers also capture and spread plant viruses. So now we've got Typhoid Mary in the mix with a horde of infectious zombies tangled up in its grip. So let's maybe dig a little deeper into some of these monsters. And I mean that literally, because many live most of their lives underground, which again is just so horror movie. Tremors, anyone? And it's because they're down there sucking all the host's blood through the phloem in the plant where they've attached to the roots in hiding, right? And in fact, some 60% of all of these plants are underground. And then they send up flowers to pollinate like other plants do, right? Looking all pretty and innocent. Yeah, well, I mean, in fact, one subterranean root parasite is famously known only by its flower, the corpse flower. There's a name for you, and it makes the news every few years because it's the largest flower in the plant kingdom. And because it smells like rotting flesh, to get pollinated by flies. Yeah, you heard that, rotting flesh. It's a trait of that little genus of plants and, parasitic plants at their finest. Halloween horror. And if you want creepier, strangely enough, the Dodder plant has been studied to better understand plant activity for reasons that scientists probably want to skirt very carefully, and that is plant intelligence, some basic, not well understood level of consciousness, and yeah. So a smart Frankenzombie's vampire typhoid Mary. Yeah. Great. Just great. I mean, we are talking about plants that lay dormant as seeds in the soil, just waiting for a perfect host to sprout up nearby so that they can pounce. And that's when the parasite, it detects its victim and sprouts also, essentially sniffing the air or the soil for its meal. And also that whole intelligence thing I was mentioning, tests have been conducted to see what happens when Dodder can choose between a nice, juicy tomato plant and maybe something less nutritious like a wheat plant. Sorry, wheat, didn't mean to offend you, but it almost always chooses the healthier, more nutrient-dense plant after it quite literally sniffed the air for chemicals that indicated which would serve them better, which is easy because plants are, they're living chemistry labs. They're always sending out chemical signals all the time. As an example, you might like the smell of cut grass, but it's quite literally the grass chemical screaming, ah! Or I don't know, however grass sounds when it screams. And anyway, we'll just pretend that didn't happen. If you're curious, there are about 4,500 known parasitic plants, and 90% of these are hemiparasitic, with about 390 being holoparasitic. Again, those true vampires. And some of those common parasites are Orobanches, also called broomrapes. Not a great name. It's a non-native invasive variety of this that has just come to American soil, sunflower broomrape in Washington state. And it's putting our sunflower industry at risk if any of them spread out. And yes, oh, by the way, I've just made an episode on that. But yes, by the way, that's a terrible name, but it could be worse. One of its sisters is Orobanche uniflora. Common name is naked broomrape. Anyway, we've also got things like Lathrea, Toothwort, Bosniakia, that's ground cones. There's Striga, also called Witchweed. Witchweed? Okay, again, with the Halloween hits, right? They just keep coming. And there's Electra, which, because we needed a sequel, that's yellow witchweed. I'm not sure why anyone wants a yellow witch in their sequel, but so many cool alien-looking plants to dig into. And if you are wondering, are there any plants that try to suck the blood from animals, from us? Well, no, there aren't, but the ghost pipe I mentioned earlier, it parasitizes mushrooms, or rather mycelium, which are not plants, in case you're curious. Although I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess they're kind of getting their food from the trees, right? Just through a middleman or a reseller or back alley DoorDash for plants. I don't know. Anyway, this isn't just creepy plant monster fun and games, by the way, because we're learning a lot from these plants, not least of which, of course, is how to prevent members of their community from decimating our crops. Looking at you, Dodder. Even more fascinating, though, is that they're not just takers, these parasites, right? They may not pay rent, but they do give back to the ecosystem. They're not just weeds, as a farmer might feel, but you remember that they are part of the ecosystem, and also that plants, farmers, that's part of the problem right there, is that we farm huge expanses of monoculture, a big old smorgasbord of plants for a hungry bug, virus, or parasitic plant, right? Rows and rows of defenseless plants just waiting victims in a row. That's not how nature grows, by the way, because plants do better in a diverse community, which is something maybe some of our politicians would do good to maybe absorb that fact for the human world, right? But again, anyway, there is a bright side to parasitic plants. They can even function as keystone species, and some provide fruit. Yeah, fruit for us. Like the Kwangdong and the hog plum, plants in need of a rebrand, but whatever. Many parasitic plants improve the cycle of nutrients into the soil, feeding new plants and herbivores and other pollinators. I guess they themselves are middlemen providing food for so many others. And these plants aren't just parasites. They serve a function. Their roles are much more complex, and they are, again, like I said, part of the ecosystem. Again, back to mistletoe, that's an example of a plant that gives food and shelter to many animals. For instance, trees infected with mistletoes are visited by more birds, which deposit their food reviews underneath, all over the ground, right? And that means more animals and more nutrients in the soil. Many parasitic plants are highly favored food plants for herbivores, especially insects and mammals. Dodder, for all its frustration to farmers, creates small ecosystems for plants. So these villains have ecological value. In fact, over time, they can increase biodiversity. Sometimes by knocking down a dominant species a peg or two, or even taming a strong invasive species, so locals can maybe still thrive. And if you're curious, here's I'll do it there. There's a paper that you can check out. It gives you a little more scientific detail about the benefits of parasitic species. Parasitic plants are also educating us in other ways. We're learning about horizontal gene transfer. Remember that little Frankenstein trick they did? Where they pass RNA and DNA. This challenges the whole concept of the tree of life and inherited traits, that some things can be transferred laterally. And we could even figure out pharmaceuticals, new pharmaceuticals, based off of what we learned from how these plants manipulate their host's biochemistry. That Indian pipe, ghost pipe, it's been used in traditional medicine for pain relief and anxiety. But don't run out and go make your little tincture of ghost pipe just yet, because it does have risk factors. And I don't know, maybe let's not destroy the planets for personal gain. Just, talk a scientist into crafting some natural pain pills off similar chemistry. And don't forget that sunflower crop killer I mentioned earlier, that is Orobanche cumana, and it's already crept into the US to potentially threaten fields worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So, I guess maybe the vampires aren't in the castles, they're in the crops? So, parasitic vampire plants. Yep, it's not just trivia. Today's weird plant fact could be tomorrow's crop-saving measures or medical breakthrough, and that is some food for thought or blood for thought or whatever Halloween-y nonsense. Anyway, if you like this, dive into botanical horror, like, share, subscribe. Twigzy Turpentine. Out.